I want to welcome all of you this morning to Gardening in the Mountains. My name is Allison Arnold. I'll be your host today. I'm the Agriculture and Horticulture Extension Agent here in Buncombe County. Welcome to Gardening in the Mountains. Get going with grasses. I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Nancy Duffy. Based in Asheville, North Carolina, Nancy Duffy is the owner of Muddy Brutes Garden Design. For nearly 20 years, she's been designing gardens that reflect the people who will inhabit them, combining beauty, function, and good horticulture. Over the last decade, Nancy has increasingly focused on natural planting styles and has done many meadow and woodland designs. Recently, Nancy designed the plantings for the first phase of the Camp North End development in North Charlotte in a style she refers to as urban wild. Nancy lives and gardens with her husband, Dennis, and a crew of critters on 4 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Thank you for joining us, Nancy, and take it away.
Thanks for having me, and good morning, everyone. As we were waiting for everybody to join us this morning, I was remembering with Allison that she brought me into a design project. It was probably about 12 years ago, and that's really when I got going with grasses. And you can see from this photo here, with credit to Randy Burrows, I was working with Randy on a part of that project. Allison brought me into the project, and Randy said, "You need to do a meadow." And so that's really how I got going with grasses, and I really haven't looked back. It's just a wonderful planting palette, and I have really enjoyed experimenting with it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I love this little saying: sedges have edges and rushes around, but grasses have nodes from their tips to the ground. This is an interesting way to be able to identify what's a grass and what's a sedge. And the rushes obviously are round. Here's a little diagram that shows what I'm talking about. The genus is Carex, and they have a leaf blade that looks very grassy, but their flowering stems are triangular. You can see they have a 3-sided flowering stem, and so that's why they have edges. And rushes, their stems are in fact round, so you can identify them that way. And then grasses have nodes all the way down their stems. That's just a little interesting differentiation between the 3 kinds of plants. There's one other kind of plant that I'm going to talk about today that's grass-like, but these are the 3 common things that we think of as grasses and grass-like plants. And here are examples. This is a sedge. This one in particular is called Evergold, and I've really gotten into the sedges recently because they're so versatile. When I first started thinking about sedges, I thought of them as shade plants primarily, but there are a lot of sedges that can take a lot of sun. And so exploring the genus Carex is definitely worthwhile, and they're very versatile plants. Rushes, they are naturally water plants, and so very valuable if you've got boggy or wet conditions. This is our native Juncus effusus. Then over here is a switchgrass, Inicum brigatum, and that is a true grass. And you can see if you kind of track down one of these stems, it might be a little blurry, but you can see that it does in fact have nodes all the way down. There's a further differentiation in the grass genus or grass family, and that is we have warm season grasses and we have cool season grasses. And this really divides the growing season of these different kinds of grasses. So warm season grasses start growing, at least up here in the mountains, probably in May. And cool season grasses start a little bit earlier. So if you think about when does your lawn grass, fescue grass, grow and look the best, it's in springtime. It really starts greening up early and looks very lush by May and June. That applies to ornamental grasses too. So this particular grass is called feather reed grass or Calamagrostis acutiflora. There's a common one that many of us who use grasses know. It's called Carl Forster. And it's a cool season grass. The implication of warm season versus cool season grasses is when you think about designing with grasses or using grasses in your landscape, A cool season grass is going to come to life much earlier in the season than a warm season grass. So if you're going to use these grasses, it's often interesting to combine warm season and cool season because you get the cool season grasses showing earlier and then the warm season come on a little bit later. The other important thing about warm season grasses in particular is because they don't start growing until the ground really warms up, you need to plant them at the beginning of a growing season, probably up here in May. So they're actively growing during their establishment period. If you plant them in the fall because they're going dormant, they tend to rot in our cool, wet winters. So you can plant cool season grasses in early fall up here. My recommendation is always springtime, but especially for the warm season grasses, because that's really when they start growing. That's just a little specific about grasses and sedges and rushes.
Okay. He has Hamlin fountain and Adagio maiden grass in pots, wanting to know if they could go ahead and plant them or should they wait till spring?
Wait till spring.
Wait till spring. Warm season grasses. All right. That's it for now on the questions.
This is another picture of same grass that I used in my opening slide, and this is called split beard blue stem, Andropogon ternarius. And there is one that was discovered in Black Mountain, and the selection is called Black Mountain. You can buy that, and it's a really beautiful grass.
Nancy, there's a couple of questions in here, but one is, are all grasses perennial?
Good question. There are some grasses that are perennial in warmer climates. And the one that comes to my mind is fountain grass, pennisetum. There's purple fountain grass, which a lot of us use in container plantings. And it's got a beautiful burgundy red stem all summer. And even in zone 8, it's iffy. If you're in Florida, that's a perennial grass. But up here, that is not a perennial grass and you can't expect it to come back. Most of the grasses that I'm going to talk about today are perennial and they'll come back.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to talk about some of the benefits of using grasses. The first one is year-round interest. And you don't think about a perennial plant that goes dormant in the wintertime as really having winter interest, but I'm going to beg to differ and say that a lot of our ornamental grasses, although they're tan, do offer a lot of interest, texture, and color in the wintertime. Here is an example of switchgrass, Panicum virgatum, and you could see the 4 different seasons of this grass. This is a warm season grass, so it greens up, starts to show green in May. And then in the summertime, it's got a beautiful blue-green leaf blade, and in late summer, it flowers, and you can see this frothy flower at the top. And then in the wintertime, a lot of these grasses have really nice fall color, oranges and yellows and reds. And here is a picture in snow, and it's still outright. It's offering color in the landscape, even though it's tan, it's still a color, and definitely adds texture and other benefits that we'll talk about. There's a period between January and February where you don't get a lot out of the grasses, but it's a pretty short period of time that they're not terribly interesting. Another benefit is the variety of color and texture. And here are just 5 examples of color and texture and how you can use these in your landscape and in your container plantings. Festuca glauca, or blue fescue, just this gorgeous steel blue. It's a mounding, beautiful grass, small, great in a container. Muhlenbergia, or purple muhly grass. This is the flower color in late summer. It starts to do that. And during the rest of the growing season, it's got kind of a medium textured green leaf blade. Water features. I mean, how interesting is this to have this Juncus opustus spiralis? So this is our rush. Another wonderful sedge or carex is Bowles golden, and great color in a shady spot. And I think I showed Evergold before, and I love the way this is draped over a wall. There are so many forms and colors and textures. There's just wonderful variety to use in your designs. And then the thing that I love about grasses, particularly the larger grasses, is how they move in the landscape when the wind blows, and how if you plant grasses where the sun can shine through it in the late afternoon, it can create stunning effects. So movement and light play are benefits. And here's your ground cover. Shorter grasses make wonderful ground covers. This is creeping red fescue. And we live in the mountains. Well, a lot of us live in the mountains. And who doesn't have a slope to deal with? And so covering the ground with grass, no-mow grasses, not lawn grasses, is a great way to prevent erosion and cover the ground. This is a planting of Carex pennsylvanica, which is a native sedge. And it just gives a beautiful sort of sweeping, soft effect. And they do bloom. And I'll show you a picture of these low grasses in bloom at the end of my talk. Very economical. Creeping red fescue can be done from seed pretty easily. The sedge, not as easy from seed, but you can buy small plants, and some of them are rhizomatous, so they will spread out and cover. And then make wonderful wildlife habitat and food. I found this quote from Justin Brock, who's a wildlife biologist, and he talks about the grasses give escape cover and food for birds and other wildlife, and increases their reproductive success. And I just love this. He had a picture of this on his website, this little bunny nest in a grass. I think that's what we should all be striving for. And here is a picture of that split-beard blue stem that I was talking about. This is Black Mountain and was found up here in the Appalachians. Those are some of the benefits that I see and why I use grasses. Any questions at this point?
Yes. So all these examples that you're giving, they're perennial for us here in Asheville.
They are. I'm going to go back a couple slides and just talk about one or two of these. Blue fescue, this is a perennial grass, but it's a short-lived perennial grass. And I just know this from experience. Whenever you are thinking about using a grass, if you're experimental, you can grow it and see what it does and see how it performs for you, or you can read about it. But blue fescue, in my experience, is a pretty short-lived grass. So you can use it, but you wouldn't want to count on it in a permanent planting. Great for containers. And if you're going to change out your perennial borders, it's beautiful in a perennial border, but it is pretty short-lived. Compared to muley grass, which is a long-lived grass, the sedges tend to really stick around. And I think the important thing is to read about your grasses. If you're considering using a grass or a sedge or a rush, read about its growing conditions and make sure you're putting it in the right place. You'll have the best success if you get it sited properly.
Great. Okay. One question was about an alternative to the purple fountain grass, that beautiful color. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Purple fountain grass I use in containers because it doesn't return for us. If I was going to choose something for a similar effect in a permanent planting, I'd probably look for a short switchgrass called Shenandoah. It's not as deep burgundy, but it does have a reddish leaf blade, so it kind of gives that effect. I do have a picture of that, so we can look at that as I go along.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
I'm a designer, so I have to talk about design. And designing with grasses is like designing with any other plant material, in my opinion, as long as you understand your plant palette. From a design standpoint, I always start with function. What am I trying to achieve? How do I want the landscape to function? Is there a particular style? Am I interested in contemporary, or am I interested in traditional or natural? So those are a couple of questions. No matter what kind of plant palette I'm going to be working with, that's where I begin. And then obviously you need to understand your growing conditions, and everyone is always surprised by how much or how little sunlight they actually have. It's really important to do a sun study, whatever area that you're about to begin working on. When the canopy is full, go out once an hour every day for a day, or different times during a period of a week, or whenever you can, and determine if you have full direct sun if it's dappled shade or if it's full shade, and shade of a building is different than shade of a tree. So figure out how many hours of sun you have. That is really critical when you're selecting grasses, because a lot of these ornamental grasses, these prairie grasses, are not going to do in shade. They're going to be floppy and they're not going to perform the way you're expecting them to. So growing conditions is really important. The other thing to think about with growing conditions is your soil. A lot of these grasses want very lean soil. They don't want this beautiful, rich, dark, moist, well-drained soil that everybody thinks about when they talk about garden soil. So if you have clay, a lot of grasses are going to do just fine in that clay. Really, all you have to do is get some air into the soil with some pine vines or something. Rich soil is not necessary to grow a lot of these grasses. So understand your growing conditions, understand something about your soil. Everybody usually starts with their plant list, but that is really the last thing you do. Think about size and shape of forms that you want in your garden area. And after you've answered questions 1 through 4, then you can start to pick your plants. I'm going to talk about grasses in different situations. Here is that particular grass that I was talking about just a minute ago, Panicum virgatum shenandoah. This is probably a grass that I would use if I wanted to achieve the effect of a purple fountain grass. It might be a little bit larger than purple fountain grass, but not too much. It's about the same shape. And it does have kind of a reddish leaf blade. It gets redder as the growing season progresses. It gets a little more burgundy, but it is always going to be a little bit green and red mixed, but it does give you some of that reddy purple color in the landscape. Makes a beautiful specimen grass. Here's a fountain grass that is hardy up here. It has a green leaf, but it has this really fun pinky flower in mid to late summer. So this particular picture has this grass in bloom in a terracotta pot. And I just like the way those two things kind of pick up on each other. And I think that's a nice specimen example. Borders, grasses are great in borders. In this particular picture, you can see this is a pennisetum with a white kind of creamy flower. It's used as a repeated element throughout this whole mixed border, which I think is nice. It adds movement. It adds texture. It adds a little bit of color with the white flower. And then over here, this is another pennisetum, same plant used in a different plant combination. And I wanted to talk about plants or grasses in combination with conifers. Grasses and conifers are fantastic together. They have very similar growing requirements with the true grasses, which want a lot of sun. Most conifers want a lot of sun. So they make good companion plants. That's why I wanted to make a note of grass planted with conifers. I love to use them together. And grasses are wonderful for massing. Obviously, this is a picture of Spirabolus heterolepis, which is prairie dropseed. It is a true prairie plant, but it's a very fine textured, low growing, mounding kind of wispy plant. I'm sure some of you have been to Chanticleer. It's a huge field planted with this grass. And the way they maintain this field of grass, which a lot of us can't do, but they do it at Chanticleer, is they burn that field every year. So that rejuvenates the grass. A lot of the prairies caught fire occasionally, and that rejuvenated all those prairie plants. And that's what they do at Chanticleer, is they burn this field of prairie dropseed every year. I wouldn't do that at my house. Here is a mass planting of a sedge. I don't know which particular sedge this is, but some of the sedges that are useful up here are Carex pennsylvanica and Carex appalachica. I think both of those are on your plant list. They make beautiful sort of soft underplantings for trees. This looks like a glade to me. They tend to be green a lot of the year, and they don't require a hard cutback. With this kind of planting, you might go through with a string trimmer and top it. We'll talk more about how to manage these grasses a little bit later, but sedges are different than grasses. Grasses want to be cut down hard, and sedges can be raked and maybe topped, but not hard cut. And here is a plant that is grass-like. I think this is nice. This is Ophiopogon japonicus nana. So it's a dwarf mondo grass. It used to be classified as a lily. I think now it's in the same family as Solomon seal, but it's a very short, maybe 3-inch grass, and here you can see it's used as a backdrop for a sculpture, which I think is very nice. One of the things that I like to talk about is covering the ground with plants instead of mulch. Here are three examples of big sweeps of ground that don't have ornamental plants coming out of them or sculpture coming out of them or rock in a sea of mulch. It's in a sea of grass or sedge or dwarf mondo grass. And that's what I'm encouraging all of my plants to do is cover the ground with plants, and grasses are a great way to do that. This is a style of planting that I've done a lot of. It's called matrix planting, and it's meadow-like. It's not a true meadow, but it's evocative of a meadow. And in this picture, this is the Laurie Garden in Chicago. It's a Pete O'Dulf design. And this is actually on top of a parking garage in downtown Chicago. I've been to this garden and it's really beautiful. I'm sure some of you have been to this garden as well. Pete O'Dulf does these, they're stylized meadows and masses. This looks a lot like prairie dropseed. I can't say for sure, and maybe a panicum. He uses them in giant sweeps, and it's just so rhythmic and beautiful the way he combines grasses and flowering perennial plants. And then here's another design using grasses and flowering perennial plants. And it is more evocative of a natural meadow, but it is very highly planned and soft and beautiful and textural. That is called matrix planting. Functionally, you can use grasses for edging and for hedging. We don't typically think of grasses for hedging. There are a few grasses that will do that job. In this picture, this is a friend of mine's garden, Siglinda Anderson. She's a local landscape architect, and she has used a Japanese forest grass called Hakadacloa macra all gold. Here, she's got grasses and conifers, and she's got this alley that comes down to an axial view of a beautiful pot, and she's lined the path with this Japanese forest grass. It's a woodland garden. It's very shady. So she's got this beautiful evergreen node leading your eye down, and then it brightens up the whole picture or composition with this yellowy, low, soft sweeping grass. I really love that design.
Gosh, a lot of questions that I think you're going to get to, but right now, does Hakanakloa survive here? Japanese forest grass?
It does. That planting that I showed in Siglinda Anderson's garden of all gold, that has been in her garden for many years, and it comes back beautifully for her. Frustratingly, I cannot get that to grow in my garden. I've tried it many times. And isn't that the way that everything you read about a plant says it's going to do, and you've seen it doing in somebody else's garden and you can't get it to do in yours? I can't explain that. But that particular grass has been growing in her garden up here in the mountains for many years, and it comes back beautifully for her. And I can't get it to grow to save my life, but it should be perennial.
Such a stunning one for the shade.
Really is. Another one that is similar is Carex Bowles Golden, which I believe I showed a picture of, and that one does beautifully for me. So it has that bright yellowy chartreuse foliage, not quite the same form, but it's a sedge, and I can get that one to grow where I can't get the Harconi to grow.
Yeah. So Carex Bowles Golden, you said?
Yeah.
How tall does that get?
I think that is about 18 inches high, upright, not quite a sweepy. For hedging, this is a wonderful grass if you've got a sunny site. This is a switchgrass or panicum called North Wind, and it is one of the most stiffly upright switchgrasses you can grow. I've grown it. It is about 6 feet tall in flower. When we talk about grasses and how tall they get, there is a blade height, which might be 4 feet. And then with the flower, it's probably 6 feet. So when you're selecting your grass based on size, think about both blade height and flower height. In flower, in the winter, you can see snow on the ground here. It is still very upright and creating a pretty dense hedge the way someone has planted it here. Water gardens, rushes are great for water gardens. And here are two examples of the same plant used in a very naturalistic way in a natural pond. I love this contemporary water garden using the exact same plant. Depending on what style you're going for, plants can, very versatile in terms of how you can enhance your planting with rushes and grasses and sedges. This is a very traditional design. It makes me think of Charlotte or Atlanta or something like that. Crepe myrtles and hydrangeas. And typically you would see ivy used as this edging plant, but this is a sedge. And they've picked a sedge that can probably take sun or shade. There are a lot of sedges that are adaptable in that regard. So very traditionally designed using a sedge. And here is another sedge used in a very contemporary design. I think this picture comes from New Zealand or Australia. I don't know that we can grow this particular carex, but if you see a picture in a magazine or online somewhere and you want to replicate or adapt that design to something you're doing, if you can't grow a plant that you see in your area, you can still find a grass or a sedge or a rush that will create the same effect. That's where you say, okay, I want something that's knee high, 2 or 2.5 feet tall, and I want it to be this particular color. And then you start your investigation into grasses or sedges or rushes that might play that role in your composition. This is a picture, I think it's from Europe for sure. I think maybe England or the Netherlands. I love the contrast, and grasses are great for this sweeping, soft, tan mass of what I think is Dystropia cespitosa, which is tufted hairgrass, mixed with evergreen material, tightly shaped. And the two of these together, I'm sure that this is beautiful in the summertime, but I think as these grasses age out for the season and some of the flowering perennials, it looks like we've got some coneflower seed heads here and some other flowering perennials. As it all ages out, then you really get this dramatic contrast between tan and evergreen. I think that's fantastic. Repeat it a little bit up here in a grass that's still green. But I think that combination of evergreen, and again, you can achieve that with conifers. I think they've got yew back here in this picture, and that's probably boxwood, which I wouldn't use anymore. But wonderful contrast and movement, stiff shapes with the evergreen plants and the movement with the grasses, I think make for a wonderful composition. Another Pete O'Dulph design, a point to answer any questions if there are any.
Beautiful. Just really great images and really stunning way to show how they can be used and incorporated into the garden landscape, Nancy. All right, that's it for now on the questions.
Grasses for various situations. I'm going to kind of run through these. So I talked about figuring out how tall you want them to be, both for the leaf blade and the flower height. Here are three that are tall. Calamagrostis acutiflora coral forester. This one, the leaf blade is maybe 3, and with the flower at 4 feet tall. Sorgastrums newtons, which is Indian grass. This is blue. It has a really nice steely blue leaf blade. This is probably 5 feet and 6 feet. And then this is the tallest grass that I know of to use around here. This is a switchgrass called Cloud 9, and this will get 7 feet, maybe even 8 feet tall. All of these require full sun and poor soil to get this nice, stiffly upright form. Grasses for part shade. This is not a native grass. This is an Asian grass. It's another Calamagrostis species called Brachytricha. And it makes these beautiful frothy flower plumes in mid to late summer, and it will handle some shade. This is probably a 3-foot grass. Most of these tall ornamental grasses want full sun, but this one will take some shade. And then into your sedges, Carex blue zinger. This is a very low grass. Rhizomatous spreads, makes a nice little ground cover. And then Northern River Oats, which is probably a 3-foot grass. Very interesting seed head, and it will take some part shade. Then full shade, Carex appalachica, which is a native sedge for us. Carex ice dance, which has got a nice variegation to it. And another sedge that is native for us, Plantagenet, it's a low growing sedge, but it's got a nice wide blade on it, which is interesting in combination with other plants.
The northern sea oats, you talked about that.
It's a real seedy plant. Some of these grasses are not considered invasive, but they are cedars. And it's good to know which ones are seedy. Pennisedum can be very seedy. Sea oats can be very seedy. And miscanthus, which I will have a little sidebar about, is invasive. So no miscanthus, even though we used to think that morning light flowered too late to be invasive. And there was some idea that the flowers were actually sterile. They're not. It is a cedar. It's invasive. It will revert to the straight species. Don't plant miscanthus.
All right, that's it for now on the questions.
Plants for moist to wet. All of the rushes do well in standing water. Carex grayi, I think this is native. I can't remember. Might be on the plant list whether it is or not, but it has this really cool seed head. And then Acorus graminis, ogon. This is another bright chartreuse, little grass-like plant for wet conditions. It will grow in standing water, but it's real short. It's only about 6 inches tall. These are some grasses for different situations. And that's why I always suggest that people start with function and style and what are your growing conditions and what are you trying to achieve, and thinking about all of the puzzle pieces that go into creating a beautiful composition. And then you'll understand what you're looking for. And then you can go out to the world of plants and start selecting plants. This is a really cool plant for fall color. This is a big blue stem called Antipogon gerardii, red October, and it just is dynamite in the fall. Mix this with a little Ansonia hubrectii, and you will have an eye-popping fall color combination. Any questions here?
Can you recommend a low growing sedge for full sun that would work as a lawn replacement?
A low growing sedge for a lawn replacement. Sedges typically are grown from small plants as opposed to from seed. So it depends on how big a space you're talking about, because seeding ground cover is far less expensive than doing what are called landscape plugs, which are small plants. They come in great big trays of 50, and you can buy them from Prairie Moon Nursery. If you look for landscape plugs online, you'll find nurseries, but Prairie Moon is the one that comes to mind that is a retail online mail order nursery. So it really depends on how big a space you're going to cover. There is a sedge that is called Carex divulsa. It looks a lot like prairie dropseed. It's a very fine textured grass-like plant. It makes kind of a fountainy mound. It's low. The blade is long, but it flops over. And it's a beautiful grass, and it will grow in sun or shade, in moist or dry. It's a newish sedge to me, but it's versatile and beautiful. And I think it should be planted more. Carex divulsa. I'm going to run through my case study, and then we'll talk about some nuts and bolts. Allison mentioned Camp North End in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have been involved in this landscape since 2019. You can see Uptown Charlotte in this picture, and this is a really interesting place to visit. If you have a chance to go to Charlotte, I recommend that you go wander around Camp North End. It's 76 acres. It's a huge property. I'm involved in a small piece of it, but I've done this landscape. The core plant material in this landscape are grasses, and it's hot, it's humid, the soil is clay, it does not have irrigation, it's hand water to become established, but then after that, it's on its own. So it's a really tough growing situation, and the grasses have performed beautifully. You can see this is little blue stem right here. I've used lots and lots of little blue stem, and I've used a switchgrass called heavy metal and some of the Korean feather grass in shadier areas. But the backbone of this landscape are grasses. Here's a picture. This is the third growing season of this landscape. I took this in early June, and you can see panicum coming up here, and this is it in mid-October. So it's the same landscape, but it really ages out beautifully. In Charlotte, the warranty grass bring up earlier than they do up here. So we would be a couple weeks behind this picture for early June using these same grasses up here. Just beautiful. I call it urban wild, and it's pretty wild. Also, this is considering your situation and do you have problem areas? This was a big problem area at Camp North End. Rain falls off this porch roof, comes down these rain chains and into this planting bed, and there is no drainage, nowhere for this water to go. It just sits and it's wet. And so I treated it like a bog. I've got Juncus effusus, our native Russian here with Joe Pye, and I've also got a tall panicum and tall switchgrass. And these plants can all handle infrequent inundation. And so when it rains hard, it's just like soup. And then it dries out and it's dry as a bone. So I treated it like a rain garden. Here's a grass. This is where I get into understanding how seedy something is. This is a grass that was already planted in this area, but I was asked to enhance it. I enhanced it with white coneflower, wild quinine, which is a really cool prairie plant. This is it having aged out here, but this is it when it's in bloom, and Russian sage. So hot, dry, baking conditions. This is Mexican feathergrass. It is invasive in California. It's on all of the no plant lists, but it is not on the North Carolina invasive list, but it is a seedy grass. So it's something that you're considering a plant and you've heard something about it's invasive or it's real seedy. If you Google it, you'll find information online. In this case, it's like concrete, so it's okay if it seeds around for us. And they like kind of a wild looking landscape to start with. You just have to know your situation. Here's your miscanthus. It's a beautiful grass to design with. I have used it in the past, but no more. Miscanthus is invasive. Don't plant it here. Back to camp. This is the picture that I took last week. And this is a matrix planting of grasses. I've got little blue stem in there. I've got that Calamagrostis brachytricha, which is the Korean feathergrass. This is not a native grass, but it is not an invasive grass, and it's not really a seedy grass, mixed with Amsonia hubretii, which has wonderful fall color, and asters, and we've got seed heads for penstemon. So just wonderful plants to use in combination with flowering perennials. This is another picture. You can see the skyline in the background. This is near a seating area, and they wanted to cover up the AC units in front of this building. So we used switchgrass and we used Sorghastrum nutans, which is Indian grass. So two tall grasses, and this gets real kind of wild looking and sort of floppy and flops over this little wall, but that's acceptable to them. And this was probably taken in midsummer. So the grasses are the backbone of this landscape. Then a little bit about planting and maintenance. We talked about planting in spring, and I think that is absolutely the right thing to do, even with cool season grasses up here. Give them one full growing season to establish their root systems, and then they should be fine over our cool, wet winters. Don't fertilize them. The only exception to that might be some of the sedges, but for the most part, you do not need to fertilize these, and they don't want a real rich, loamy soil. The only thing I would do if you have really hard, dense clay is work in pine fines. And what that does is create air pockets, and it just gives the plant roots a way to get established into that fine clay soil. What do you do with it? I leave all these grasses standing over the winter, and in late February, early March is when you cut them down. My rule of thumb on cutting back grasses, not sedges, but grasses, is cut the plant 2/3 down to the leaf blade. You don't ever want to cut down to the crown of the plant. You want to leave about 1/3 of that leaf blade standing. Here's a picture. This is a switchgrass that's been cut down to about 1/3 of its height. That's just a good rule of thumb. Sedges are different. Most of the time, I just take a rake and rake through it, and it pulls some of that, the blade will turn brown, and then you've got a mix of green blades and brown blades. And just to tidy that up and make it look better, I typically will rake through it. If the whole thing is brown, you can cut it. They come back much more slowly. And a lot of times they're kind of green over the winter, at least partially. So my preferred method is to rake a sedge rather than cut it hard. Some of these grasses, particularly warm season grasses, will die out in the center. And you can dig a whole clump in probably springtime when it's going to start growing again. Dig it, divide it, just chop it into pieces and replant it. This is a ground cover blend of fescue grasses, one of which is creeping red fescue. And the blend is called Lynx Mix, and you can get it at Site One or Landscape Supply Center. It's inexpensive to use. I use this all the time. You can see it in my garden here in flower. So this is a grass that is considered a no-mow grass. It gets to about 6 or 8 inches tall, and it's floppy. So it lays down. You can mow it once or twice a season. If you want a tidier look, if you want this soft and loose look, you can just let it go. And as I said, here it is in flower. These are the flower stalks. Some people don't mind that. If you let the flower stalk stand, then it will sort of reseed and repopulate your grass patch. If it's too messy for you, you can just take the string trimmer and zip across your area and rake that off for a tidier look. The nice thing about this is it's green most of the year. The maintenance on it is low. The hardest thing to do with this planting is in the springtime, right before it starts to green up again. This is all full season grasses. So maybe in March or something, you would take a hard rake and get the thatch out, rake through it and get the thatch out, maybe overseed bare spots. But it's a really wonderful ground cover. The creeping red fescue is rhizomatous, so that kind of knits all of these clumping fescues together. If you put it on a slope, you can put a jute mesh down and seed on top of it, and that will help hold the seed in place. Inexpensive, easy to use, and makes a nice lawn alternative.
Here we go. Thank you so much. About the no-mow grasses that you just talked about, will those spread into adjacent perennial beds?
Not really, in my experience. So the grasses in this particular mix, the Lynx Mix, there are 3 clumping fescues, so those don't run. And the creeping red fescue is rhizomatous and spreads, but not aggressively. So I think it'd be pretty easy to manage.
Okay. And does that go well in sun and shade? The Lynx Mix?
I would say part shade to sun. This is a pretty shady situation that I've got right here, and it does fine. So it's probably on the edge, but if you've got 4 hours of sun or more, it's fine. The creeping red does well in shade, and so that's the thing that's going to hang it together in a shadier situation.
And I know the no-mow mix will certainly take some traffic. I think that's the tricky thing with looking at ornamental grasses to replace our tall fescue lawns that we're used to. That's a whole different conversation and aesthetic. So no-mow is good in full sun. And I think there's some questions about establishing a no-mow lawn. Yes, you do have to get rid of your tall fescue before you start this project.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to start with a nice, clean planting bed.
Yeah. Tall fescue is very aggressive and will win out for sure. So the Carex divulga, what did you call it?
Divulsa.
Divulsa. Yeah, will that take some light foot traffic?
I think it will. I'd have to look that up to be sure, but I think it does. I think it's a pretty useful sedge.
So let's see. The tall grasses that fall over, I think early on you talked about Panicum virgatum. There has been an issue with that. How do you respond to that?
My question is, why did it fall over? The reason why tall grasses fall over is they're growing in too much shade. Water is spilling on them from above. I've seen that at Camp North End. They'll have a gutter problem and it'll just splay out. So look for issues where there's a gutter spilling onto it or the soil is too rich. Those are the 3 reasons why tall grasses flop over. Tall grasses, those panicums, want 6 to 8 hours of full direct sun. Otherwise, they're floppy.
What about deer resistance? Are you seeing deer issues with any of the grasses that you grow?
You know, I think that these grasses are quite deer resistant. I've done a lot of work in Biltmore Forest recently, but it's so shady over there. I don't typically use a lot of grasses. But when I look at Rutgers University or North Carolina State University deer resistant list, grasses tend to be on those lists. So I think it's pretty safe.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is great. Nancy, Duffy, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.